introductions. But I would like to ask everybody to just post their details, their, who they are, the company that they're coming from, and yes, and so that you can actually all get to know each other. And I would encourage people that to also, just write directly to each other in the course of the meeting. If there are any questions or any engagements or business linkages you'd want to benefit from while you're here, please don't hesitate to do that. This meeting is not just about training, it's also about linking you as businesses together. So on that note, I'd like to welcome my distinguished panel of directors who will be opening the ceremony. Allow me to introduce Mr. Marde Ventakasamy. He is the chairman of the COMESA Business Council. He's also the immediate past president of the Mauritius Chamber of Commerce and Industry, a very strong businessman in his own right. I believe even this is of keen value to you as a business. And I'd also like to introduce Mr. Dr. Ambassador Kipyego Cheluget, who is Assistant Secretary General Programs of COMESA. The COMESA institutions actually lie within his jurisdiction, and is here representing the COMESA Secretary General. And I do believe also some of the key directions and discussions we'll be having here today would be directly translated into policy motions that could be discussed at the COMESA level. So thank you, Dr. Cheluget, for coming. Before I also continue, I'd also like to introduce Mr. Dixon Pology, my business policy programs manager, who will be leading this session here today. Dixon, it's good to have you on board, and I believe after we finish the opening ceremony, you will be leading the discussions going forward. So on that note, allow me to just give a few short opening statements to set the tone of the meeting. For those of you who may not know the COMESA Business Council, we are the leading business member organization in Africa, in COMESA rather, but I think also currently one of the strongest in Africa, bringing together a diverse group of business associations and companies, micro, small and medium enterprises, multinational companies, from over 34 sectors in 21 countries in COMESA. CBC promotes competitive and interconnected industries to actively participate in regional and global markets through advocacy, business facilitation, and enterprise development. Just a snapshot about COMESA. COMESA is a market with a population of about 583 million people. We cover a geographical area of about 12 million square kilometers, presenting the largest trade bloc in Africa. So this is a very, very important intervention for us when trying to understand how the CFTA actually promotes business agendas within Africa. And as of 2019, COMESA exported goods worth $112 billion into the market, and we also imported goods worth $212 billion. And our trade deficit, of course, given also so many other dynamics, has been at about $100 billion. Intra-COMESA trade and intra-COMESA exports were worth about $10 billion, and our intra-COMESA imports were about $11.2 billion. The total intra-COMESA trade stood at about $22.1 billion. These statistics are important because one of the key agendas of the Continental Free Trade Area is to promote intra-Africa trade. And so we need to also understand what are the various instruments, facilitation requirements, and business practices that countries need to engage in order to ensure that we can increase our intra-trade figure from the current volumes and values that it is today. So the private sector, of course, is a key stakeholder and a beneficiary of the CFTA. The business communities are actual traders and investors. They are the backbone of the economy. They're responsible for the movement of goods and services across all our borders. So to fully tap into the CFTA, there are about 4 key issues we need to address to ensure increased industrialization. And this will definitely strengthen our participation as a private sector in the CFTA. So I hope the policymakers, the drivers, regulators, development partners, and stakeholders who are here could also consider this as we start discussing in the meeting. So the first one is on strengthening public-private dialogue and partnerships. The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa predicts that full implementation of the CFTA will raise intra-Africa trade from 15% to 15 billion in 2017 and to 25% or 70 billion by 2040. So since Such importance can only be fully realized when the private sector is engaged and able to effectively partner and take advantage of opportunities that are provided within regional and continental integration agendas. So it is also important to acknowledge the critical importance of the private sector as an engine of economic growth, sustainable development, and poverty reduction. We know that the private sector is a leading contributor to employment in the developing world, and both in formal and informal jobs. So public-private collaboration has been a key driver in country strategies for successful integration in the global economy. And we know that experience has shown that governments in developing or LDCs focus on export-led growth strategies. And this must be established as a mechanism for sustained and inclusive dialogue between the two parties. So we also know that effective PPDs lead to mutually beneficial collaboration between the government and the private sector. And it also lays a foundation for public-private collaboration and public-private partnerships. So it's definitely very, very important for us to push this forward. Secondly, we need to also address productivity and capacity issues. So the low percentage in intra-regional trade and limited industrialization entails the need for the strengthening of value chains within the region through addressing the technical capacity constraints that SMEs and businesses face in order to develop competitive and quality products that stand for global competition. So there's definitely a requirement to build the standards and quality assurance infrastructure from a business and institutional or regulatory point of view to ensure that African businesses can develop products that meet global standard requirements. And so I'm actually glad that the African Organization of Regional Standards, ARSO, is here today so that we can actually discuss this extensively. We also need to provide technical and financial capacity needs to boost businesses from SME level to growth, medium and large enterprises. And this can also help them to become more sustainable. And lastly, we need to increase investment in technologies such as the fourth industrial revolution. We're also moving into the fifth industrial revolution itself. So enabling private partnerships to embrace smart technologies in the manufacturing processes, and also enabling the governments to implement the right regulations that could facilitate access to digital transformation solutions across our markets. And then lastly, we need to look at market and trade infrastructure to support industrialization. So when you have a large market like COMESA and the rest of the African continent, which is fragmented, has a lot of borders, a lot of multicultural dynamics, there is definitely a need to strengthen infrastructure. And if you look at countries like Egypt and Mauritius, who seem very wide apart in terms of geography, but you can imagine the major opportunities for trade between them. It's important to strengthen existing market and trade infrastructure supports to set up connectivity and linkages between our African countries. So the following aspects are needed to address industrialization and also infrastructure development. So we need an efficient transport sector, well-managed freight logistics systems, and I think COVID-19 has actually shown us that our regional supply chain system really needs a lot of work to make it more efficient and effective. And we need these systems to facilitate the mobility of goods and people across the land, air, and sea in a safe, timely, and cost-effective manner. We also need our trade facilitation powers in this room to address issues in respect to customs interconnectivity, e-facilitation of documentation, vehicle overload controls in terms of way bridges and different load systems, addressing the aspect of multiple documentation and process requirements, port inefficiencies, among others. And of course, most importantly, especially now, addressing air connectivity and the cost of travel in Africa, which has now become even worse due to the fact that we're trying to manage COVID-19 imports into the continent. And then, of course, lastly, we need to also address the cost of doing business in Africa. The cost of manufacturing in African countries is so high. So for most states to fully capitalize in the CFTA, there's a need to address the following actions on manufacturing. We need to address the cost of water, energy, and taxes. We need to actually discuss and engage in regulatory inconsistencies or changes that also affect business decisions to increase investment or trade in the region. So as a private sector, and I'm sure we'll also be articulating that in this meeting, we are recommending, of course, investing in value addition, establishing value chains, using innovation and technology, and finding the best source of the best alternative sources, even in Africa, for raw materials. And this will definitely help us to support and boost our infrastructure ecosystem within Africa. So I'm sure you as business associations and manufacturers are here today to discuss on how you can actually address all these issues with respect to your businesses. And I hope you'll be as candid and as open as possible to engage with the lead experts from UNECA and ARSO on the same. So with that note, I'd like to thank you for listening to us, and I hope we have actually set quite a bit of the tone of the meeting. And on this note, I'd like to invite my chairperson, Mr. Made Ventakasani, to make his official statement, and thereafter invite the Assistant Secretary General to also officially open the meeting. Thank you. Chair, over to you.
Thank you, CEO Sandra Uwera, representative of the COMESA Secretary General, Ambassador Chuluket, my colleagues, CBC board members, captains of industries and companies, the CBC Chief Executive Officer, members of CBC, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. First, I wish to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to this workshop, and congratulations to CBC, because I understand that we have over 160 participants to this workshop. Secondly, I wish to thank the COMESA Secretariat for their continued support, collaboration, partnership, and the opportunity to jointly promote and advance regional agenda in COMESA region. I also wish to take this opportunity to thank United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, the UNECA, and African Organization for Standardization, also for agreeing to partner with us in hosting this very important workshop. The theme of the workshop is translating the ACFTA Agreement for business. The training is timely and bringing together stakeholders from CBC membership, namely business associations, manufacturers and SMEs, export promotion councils, investment promotion agencies, and regional and international cooperating partners specialized in the ACFTA agenda. Distinguished guests, the ACFTA aims to connect 1.3 billion people across 55 countries with a combined gross domestic product, GDP, valued at $3.4 trillion of US dollars. The hopes and aspirations attached to the ACFTA is for trade, industrialization, and addressing the effects of COVID-19. The ACFTA promises a virtuous circle of greater market opportunities, triggering more trade and investment, and allowing greater value additions and productivity growth, leading to more and better jobs with social inclusions and thus further enlarge markets. It is estimated that implementing the ACFTA will increase the volume of intra-Africa trade by 81% by 2035 and increase the volume of total African export by 29%. This is according to World Bank 2020. By boosting intra-African trade and fostering regional value chains and production networks, the ACFTA is expected to drive Africa's structural transformation. Overall, the biggest gains from the ACFTA are expected from the reduction of non-tariff barriers and from trade facilitation, which are estimated lead to raise intra-African trade by between 50 and 132%. Gross domestic product gains are between 1% to 4%. But for the full benefits of the ACFTA to accrue to African countries and citizens, numerous additional policy enablers, measures, reforms, and investment are also key, not least in infrastructure, transport corridors, and logistics, as well to improve the business climate in African countries. At COMESA Business Council, we will be working with you, the private sector, towards addressing policy gaps that exist in our region. This will assist in creating a conducive environment for the private sector to move their products and services across the region. It is important to note that at the private sector, you are the major engine for sustainable economic growth and development, job creation, and poverty alleviation in Africa and across the world. In Africa, the private sector accounts for 80% of the total production, 2/3 of investment, and 3/4 of credit, and employs 90% of the working age population. In addition, 90% of the firms within the African private sector are small and medium enterprises. These businesses' participation in cross-border trade is very limited due to tariffs, non-tariff barriers, which include complex customs and trade procedures, lack of access to finance, high transportation costs, and lack of access to information, among others. These challenges to be addressed, there is need for strong dialogue and collaboration between the public and private sector. This workshop is therefore expected to provide training on ACFTA, particularly with respect to key protocols in trade, in goods, enhance engagement of private sector players in the process of implementing the agreement, and come up with recommendations on how to improve the implementation of the agreement. The workshop, therefore, provides good opportunities for us stakeholders to gain more knowledge and understanding the ACFTA. I look forward to a fruitful deliberation, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Chair. And once again, I'd just like to thank the Chairman and the Board of Directors here in present for their active participation today, and also for inviting your members to participate in this meeting. I hope we'll have very fruitful deliberations. On that note, I'd like to invite Ambassador Dr. Kipyego Cheluget to officially open this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. I hope you can hear me clearly. I want to be sure that you can. Sandra, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, can you? Okay, all right. So let me first of all really appreciate your leadership of your chairman of the CPC and yourself, Sandra, for organizing this workshop. Let me also recognize the captains of industry and heads of companies and CEOs of business associations who are attending this meeting. And I'm also happy that it's well attended. And we also want to recognize the members of the CPC and other distinguished guests. Let me take this opportunity to welcome all the participants to this workshop. And of course, I really want to thank the COMESA Business Council for inviting us as COMESA Secretariat to be part of the workshop. And COMESA Secretariat and CPC, we work very closely together. We even share the same building. Those days when we used to work together physically, but even now virtually, we're always in touch, trying to drive the agenda of integration in our region. And also, I wish to recognize the presence of the representatives of the United Nations Economic Commission, UNECA, and the African Organization for Standardization, ASO. And as COMESA, we also work very closely with these institutions, and both UNECA and ASO, we work very closely, especially with ASO on issues of standards, and with UNECA, there's a long-standing relationship dating back to the founding of COMESA. Now, I've looked at the theme of the workshop, which is says that translating the ACFTA agreement for business. This is really timely and quite relevant to us in the COMESA region. So I think the theme by itself really shows you what the workshop is all about. But perhaps before we talk about the African Continental Free Trade Area, I think we have to have a background about the role of COMESA in the formation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Many years ago, maybe 25 years ago, during the founding of COMESA, there was a deliberate insertion in our treaty about the need to create an African Economic Community. And all these years, during the work of COMESA, our aim has been to unite the continent and eventually having one African Economic Community. And I think the Lagos Plan of Action and all the other activities that we've seen have contributed to this. And the other genius about the founders of COMESA was that for COMESA to be sustainable, they had to have institutions around it that will carry out the decisions. You'll have the secretariat, but still you have the private sector and we have the CBC. So the COMESA Business Council and 14 other institutions, including the Trade and Development Bank and other insurance companies, form what we now call COMESA. And on top of that, we even have the Competition Commission, and we even have make sure that we are very cognizant of the important role played by gender. That's why we have, within the Secretariat, we have a Directorate for Gender and Social Affairs, but also we have the FEMCOM, or the Federation for Women in Business. So all along then, I think our situation in as far as working together with the continent is concerned was really well formulated. So when the agreement came to be, the CFTA then presented numerous opportunities for the business community. This agreement, which was launched on January 1st of 2021, is just this year, a few months ago, opens up a huge market of 1.2 billion people across 54 countries with a GDP of valued about 2.5 trillion. At the 18th session of the African Union meeting held from 29th to 30th of January 2012 in Addis, Ethiopia, the African heads of state and government recognized that the promotion of intra-African trade is a fundamental factor for sustainable economic development, employment generation, and effective integration of Africa into a global economy, and decided to establish the Continental Free Trade Area by 2017. But before that, there were many other steps, because way back in 2008, the heads of states of 3 regional economic communities, the East African Community, COMESA, and SADC, had decided to form what we call the tripartite, or the tripartite free trade area. And in 2015, there was a signature in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, establishing the TFTA. The reason I'm saying this is because it's my belief, since I was there, I was in Sharm el-Sheikh, and I was in a number of the other summits of the TFTA, that the reason why the CFTA came to be was as a result of the work done by the tripartite. So, and my colleagues in COMESA put in a lot of hours and a lot of work to the formation of the tripartite. And this made it possible then for the CFTA to be born, and within the time frame that was given. So that is why on the 21st of March 2018 in Kigali, Rwanda, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area was signed by the vast majority of African Union member states, and it was entered into force in May 2019, after 22 member states deposited their ratification instruments. This was followed by a launch by heads of states on July 7, 2019, and 54 countries out of 55 have signed the agreement. By the end of 2020, 39 have deposited their ratification instruments. So this has been a phenomenal achievement, because usually agreements such as this take a long time, even though the TFTA, for example, hasn't even reached where the CFTA, which came much later. Definitely, we in COMESA are very proud that we continue to contribute towards the building of the CFTA. And the reason why it's even going to be more important is because the instruments that were established, the trade facilitation instruments that COMESA has, are going to be the engine and the oil that will enable the CFTA to flourish and to work across the continent. And as we know, the overarching vision of CFTA is to create a single liberalized market for goods and services facilitated by movement of persons to deepen the economic integration of the African continent. The agreement covers trading goods, trading services, and rules of and procedures in dispute settlement. So CFTA, therefore, is a good opportunity to enjoy the economies of scale and access cheaper raw materials from other countries in the continent. It's also time to think about developing and promoting continental value chains, including promoting African local content. It's also time to think about how to start addressing NTBs and trade facilitation measures at continental level. It's an opportunity to connect Africa also by rail and road and rail. And obviously now in this era of the pandemic, another very important infrastructure, we may not require rail or air or whatever, that is the ICT. So the ICT is so crucial. And even for us in COMESA, we have even come up with new instruments. For example, one of the latest ones that we've been working on together with the African Development Bank is what we call the 50 Million Women Speak digital platform, where we hope to connect more than 50 million women across the continent. And it is being championed by COMESA, EAC, and ECOWAS. So you can imagine the infrastructure of ICT that will enable us to transcend the physical difficulties and the problems that have been thrown our way by the pandemic. So as we look for opportunity, let us also look at the gaps which need to be addressed to keep the momentum of continental integration and development, especially on the supply side constraints. This has been one of the main concerns, but we should be able to address it as we progress towards integration process. I understand that this workshop is also focusing on the protocol on trade in goods, an instrument which has direct impact on manufacturers, traders, and investors. It's therefore important for participants in the workshop to take keen interest on the workshop in order to understand the operations and benefits of the agreement and take advantage of it. And for us in COMESA, we are very willing and hope that the private sector can obviously take advantage of all these instruments that have been built over the years that definitely will contribute towards the success of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So with those few remarks, I wish you a wonderful training and wonderful workshop. I thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador Cheluget. Your comments and insights are very much appreciated. It's also good for us to understand the history behind the CFTA and COMESA and the general alignment between all the regional economic communities as they look towards implementing the requirements and obligations of the CFTA, and also how we should look at Africa in general, as a whole. Thank you very much for that interesting, vision on the continent. So on that note, I'd just like to officially open this meeting and move into the technical requirements of the meeting. So Chairman, thank you very much. Ambassador Kipyego, thank you very much. I would now like to welcome Dixon to join the meeting. I'm just putting the spotlight on you, Dixon.
Thank you.
And lead us through the rest of the sessions.
Okay.
We are now moving into from the opening session to the plenary. Over to you, Dixon. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, for just setting the pace for us in the opening session. Now, ladies and gentlemen, now we'll be moving to the second session, where now we'll want now to understand exactly what the agreement is talking about. So I think we'll be taken through the agreement. This second session, or that is the technical session. Just before that, I think I just wanted to indicate to the listener that I think for those ones who will be having comments, if you having questions, you can post them in the chat, and also towards the end of this session, we'll be able to get questions, comments from the participants. So with that, I think let's begin our session. So I will first of all invite our first presenter. Our first presenter, she's Lulade Mengistu. Mengistu, just to give the background of the facilitator who will be taking us through the session on the agreement itself, which I think should be dwelling on the protocol, and of course the progress of elimination of tariff, and also on the rules of origin, and also just giving us the highlight of what the status of the elimination of tariff. So Lullaby, she's a trade expert from UNECA, where she provides legal analysis. Of course, she's by training, she's a lawyer, 7 years experience. So now I wish to take this opportunity to invite Lullaby. Lullaby, are you able to upload your presentation?
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me check. I don't believe so. So if you would assist me, that would be really helpful.
Let me just try to see if you can be able to get your presentation.
Lulade, have you been made a co-host so you can upload your presentation?
Yes.
Sorry?
I think I was. I am trying to share my screen.
Okay, that's good.
Getting the says only one person can share a screen. So
have you managed? They're still looking for your presentation. I think they should be uploading it.
Okay.
So as we wait for presentation for Lulade, I think maybe I just also give the highlights in terms of the opportunities which are of course available under ACFTA. I think of course first we are talking about the market, because we've had a number of presenters indicated that at the moment we've got 1.2 billion as the market. That's a very sizable market. At the moment, I think in COMESA we've got around 586 million market. So if you talk about the Continental, that's a very big market. Then of course there's the issue of inter-African trade, which is at the moment less than 8%. So this is an opportunity for us, especially the areas of when you talk about this pandemic, where we've learned that I think a number of countries have put a lot of restriction on their export. So it's an opportunity for us as Africa to be able to trade among ourselves, so that we can be able even to enhance and also increase inter-African trade, which is at the moment less than 18%. And of course, also the other issue we can also talk about is the trade facilitation agreement, which I think most of the African countries have been trying to implement. So this is also an opportunity to be able to fully implement, also to try to implement that trade facilitation agreement, which is, of course, will be able to enhance trade in the African continent. Of course, we've also heard about that. This is an opportunity also to enjoy the economies of scale, also access to cheaper raw material. I think it's okay. Maybe I can stop there now. Lullaby, are you ready now?
Fantastic. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can be able to see your screen. You can comment from there.
Okay, wonderful. Apologies participants for the technical difficulties. Good afternoon again. My name is Lula De Brahanu. I'm a trade expert with the Economic Commission for Africa. It's a pleasure to be with you to discuss this very timely issue, the AfCFTA. I'll be walking you through the AfCFTA, and in particular the Trades in Good Protocol. During the course of my discussion, I'll try to highlight the rationale for the AfCFTA, its current state of play, and the expected results. Some of these things have been discussed in the opening remarks, so I'll not spend a lot of time on those issues. I'll also try to give you an overview of the Protocol of Trade and Goods, in particular where we are with regards to the liberalization of tariffs and where we are with regards to the rules of origin negotiation. Finally, I'll try to tee the conversation for the regional value chain development in light of rules of origin. So going into it, the AfCFTA.
Sorry, Lulade, before you continue, could you kindly put your screen on full display as a PowerPoint? Because right now we're looking at it, yeah. If you look at the top left corner, you can see the bottom left corner, you can see 3 sections, right? There's a PowerPoint. Just scroll down, yes, yeah, right there. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
I think that's okay, thank you.
So the AfCFTA aims to create one African market. It hopes to consolidate Africa's 2.4 trillion economy and take advantage of our growing market. As some of you may know, 6 of the 10 fastest growing economies are in Africa. Our population is expected to expand from 1.3 billion in 2020 to 2.75 billion by 2016. And GDP is also forecasted to grow from 3 trillion in 2020 to 16 trillion by 2060. As you will see from this infographic, exports to outside of Africa predominantly center on the extractive goods. But within Africa, we trade less of those goods. This highlights the potential for building our regional value chains and industrializing. No country has ever, at least few countries have developed without industrialization, and most of our economies hope to take advantage of the AfCFTA to build an industrial base. Another rationale for the AfCFTA is to stay ahead of the curve. As we see growing trends in protectionism, new WTO rules, cohering African trade policies gives us leverage in addressing these new trends and staying ahead of the curve. So where are we now? As has been alluded to earlier, the AfCFTA agreement goes beyond traditional FTAs and it covers other issues as well. Much like the COMESA which also deals with competition issues. The AfCFTA also envisaged to deal with things like intellectual property rights, investment, and competition policy. E-commerce is also hopefully going to be dealt with under phase 3 negotiations. This is taking into account the importance that e-commerce has had in our economies, especially in the context of the pandemic. So what are some of the agreements the AfCFTA covers? So it has,
I don't know, could you speak up a little bit? You're very low.
hello, can you hear me now?
You need to move closer to your microphone, or if you have an earpiece, it would be better. Yeah, so that we can, yeah, that's better.
Okay.
You need to speak up a bit louder. Thank you.
Apologies. So it seems like we're having a lot of technical issues, but I hope you were able to follow me so far. The AfCFTA agreement, as I was saying earlier, covers the protocol on trade in goods, the protocol on trade in services, and protocol on dispute settlements under the phase 1 issues, which have been agreed to. Under phase 2, member states will negotiate and have begun negotiating intellectual property rights, investment laws, and competition policies. E-commerce has also been added onto the list as a phase 3 issue, but the hope is to have that negotiated as part of phase 2 agendas and completed by December 2021. So where are we? I think this has also been, to a certain extent, highlighted earlier on, but I will set the scene. The AfCFTA negotiations officially started in 2015, and the agreement entered into force by 2019. Trading was set to begin by January 2021, although it has technically commenced. In practice, member states are yet to utilize the AfCFTA because of some pending negotiations, including rules of origin and customs rules. And so the hope is to have all outstanding issues negotiated by June 2021 and to commence trading. So far, we have 36 member states that have signed, ratified, and deposited their instruments of ratification, and 18 that have only signed. Only Eritrea remains with no commitment. In regards to the submission of tariff offers, we have around 41 tariff offers that have been submitted, but not all of these offers come from member states that have ratified the instrument. What this means is that although these are offers, they're non-binding offers because these members have not signed on to the agreement. And so where are we in regards to each protocol? On trade in goods, as I've said earlier, rules of origin negotiation remain, and we'll dive a little deeper into what that means throughout our discussion. On trade and services, 5 priority sectors have been identified. Member states are now discussing including health and education, given the importance of these sectors to the economies, and also given what we've seen transpire over the COVID pandemic. Negotiation on phase 2 issues will be concluded by December 2021. So I guess we have seen in the continental context many agreements, many ambitious agreements being negotiated, signed, but without actual implementation. So the pace and the degree to which member states have shown commitment to ratifying and to realizing the AfCFTA speaks to the expectation of member states with regards to the impact on their economies, and particularly, obviously, for the private sector. The empirical assessment of the AfCFTA shows that African GDPs and exports would increase for all countries once the AfCFTA is implemented in full. So the benefits, specific benefits on intra-African trade are illustrated in the slides following. So some of the main sectors that we could expect strong potential in the promotion of industrialization in include agriculture and food, energy and mining, industry and services. And as you can see from this graph, largest increases, percents over 25% of inter-Africa exports will be found in textile, apparel, leather, wood, pepper, vehicle, transport, electronics. This is not to say that other sectors will not deliver results, but this is just to highlight that our largest increases will be in these sectors. This also highlights the potential for regional value chain development and the potential for intra-African trade-based industrialization. And then another concern is tariff revenues. So for member states, of course, because we are promoting free trade area through the AfCFTA, there is an expected decrease in tariff revenues. However, the impact on welfare far outweighs this decrease. So change in tariff revenues and welfare across various scenarios, the scenarios being high ambition scenario where member states liberalize to the fullest extent possible, ranging to low ambition scenarios. You can see that the welfare gains and the tariff revenue losses do not only balance each other out, but the latter far outweighs the former. So let's now go into the specific protocol on trading goods. So the protocol on trading goods, it aims to liberalize African markets for African goods. So this is a very important point to highlight, because when we say African markets to African goods, we're talking about promoting goods from our own private sector. We're talking about avoiding trade diversion, and how that plays out and how that will be ensured will be discussed, of course, subsequently. But how does the protocol on trading goods aim to liberalize African markets for African goods? One of the mechanisms is the elimination of tariffs and non-tariff barriers. As has been highlighted earlier, the biggest gains are, of course, going to come from non-tariff barriers, but countries will eliminate both progressively. The other one is enhanced efficiency of customs procedures. Customs procedures, trade facilitation, and transit. Development and promotion of regional and continental value chains, which will be discussed by my colleague later on, is also another mechanism, and the promotion of diversification and industrialization across Africa will also be another important tool. The protocol has 9 annexes, and it provides for specifics of realizing or of putting into action these mechanisms. We will specifically focus on Annex 1 on schedules of tariff concession and Annex 2 on rules of origin. So when we talk about schedules of tariff concessions, member states are expected to submit their tariff offers or their conditions for liberalizing trade in accordance with the modalities agreed. In these modalities, these modalities provide for the ways or provides for the conditions that need to be fulfilled for the AfCFTA to attain its full objectives. What does that mean? That means in terms of the tariff lines that need to be liberated or that need to be tariff-free, the modalities provide for those conditions. So member states have accordingly agreed to liberalize 90% of the tariff lines. So it's not just providing for the products that will be tariff-free, but those lines have to represent 90% of the value of imports. They actually have to have trade impact in order for the AfCFTA to create one African market. The 90%, of course, states are not expected to liberalize overnight. For developing countries, a 5-year period is provided for. And for LDCs or less developed countries, they'll be given 10 years within which they'll be expected to cut their tariff to zero on 90% of the tariff lines. Longer times are envisaged for the 7%. So that would make up 97% of the tariff lines in total. For the 7% products, states can say that these products are too sensitive to liberalize at this rate. And so they've been given a longer timeline to do so. So 10 years for LDCs and 13 years for LDCs. Sorry, 10 years for non-LDCs and 13 years for LDCs. The remaining 3% out of the 100 can be excluded. But the hope is member states will see the benefits of making a full commitment and will not leave anything out. But so far, states have agreed to these modalities. This is supposed to be finalized. Submissions of offers are supposed to be finalized by 2021, by December 2021, in accordance with Annex 1 of the protocol. The submitted schedules, the 41 schedules of tariff sessions that have already been submitted, are undergoing technical review by the AfCFTA Secretariat, which is based in Accra. So they're not technically available for general public, but once they undergo a preliminary review, the practice has been to undertake bilateral negotiation between state parties for further liberalization. And then once that's done and the final schedules are submitted in December, member states will, of course, decide how they will make known those offers to their private sector, to the private sector in their borders, within their borders. This also brings us to the rules of origin under Annex 2. So, of course, member states are expected to liberalize 90% of their tariff lines, and that would mean that they are conceding to give offers a preferential treatment to products that are originating from AfCFTA member states on those tariff lines. But the question is, how do you determine that product is coming from that member state? Which brings us to the question of originating. So for a product X to be originating and entitled to preferential treatment in country Y, it's not just about the product coming out of the borders of country X. It's that it needs to fulfill certain criteria that country Y can use to define it as originating from country X. To put it in to simplify it further, say you have computer product that's being exported to country X from country Y. In order for country X to give that product preferential treatment, country Y has to show that the computer originates from its territory or is made by its own private sector. And the conditions that need to be fulfilled for it to fall in this category of made by or originating from that country is governed through Annex 2 rules of origin. So Annex 2 discusses things like the way in which goods cross border, the elements that should be taken into consideration in determining the origin, the certification requirements, exemptions, if any, and where there are disputes, how those disputes are to be dealt with. So far, as you can imagine, this is a very complex undertaking, but member states have made considerable progress. So far, they've managed to agree on 81.61% of the tariff lines, with 18.39% still outstanding. These are expected to be finalized by June 2021, and member states are working under a very strict deadline to complete these negotiations, and are really making some good headway on this front. So I guess for the private sector, the most important question is, how do you know your product qualifies, or does your product qualify? So in order for a good to benefit from preferential treatment, it has to, as we've said earlier, originate from the country that is a state party to the AfCFTA. This is to avoid the situation where other countries or other producers from non-member states take advantage of this preferential treatment, where our own private sector is put on the sidelines. So the rule of origin considers products as originating if, for example, has been wholly obtained. So this, for example, you can imagine for agricultural products can be rather, for talking about very straightforward products, very easy to determine. The other condition is that it has to undergo substantial transformation in that state party from which it's originating. This means there needs to be value addition, or a non-originating material content has to be within a certain threshold. There needs to be a change in tariff heading or a specific process. It's also important to note that the AfCFTA recognizes accumulation, so gives producers the opportunity to expand sourcing options of foreign inputs while retaining the originating status. And this is very important because, as we know, in our markets, we have a problem sourcing inputs. Even if we want to wholly source from within the continent, there are circumstances where those inputs are not available. So the recognition of accumulation expands the option of the private sector to use foreign inputs, as long as it also adds value, changes its tariff heading. There's a specific process that substantially changes the nature of the product, so that that product can be considered originating. So full accumulation is foreseen within the AfCFTA. So as we've said, accumulated inputs acquire originating status if operations are undergone to meet a minimum level of value addition, and that minimum level, of course, is subject to negotiation between state parties. Where trade takes place between AfCFTA state parties that also belong to REC-FTA, the latter rules of origin apply. And this is very, very important for this discussion, because you might be wondering if we're trading within COMESA and we're also members to the AfCFTA, which rules of origin apply? And with full accumulation, it means the AfCFTA gives you the option to apply your RIC FTA. Of course, the AfCFTA does not provide for the prohibition of drawback, which makes linkages with other FTAs possible. So this takes us to the design of rules of origin. It's a very...
Maybe there's a bit of background noise.
Hi. Hello, Faye.
Yeah. Please ensure the new is muted. Please, whoever is.
Hello?
You can proceed. Yeah, you can proceed.
So this takes us to designing rules of origin that promote regional value chains and tease the conversation up for the next presentation. So the ideal rule of origin will take into account the need to expand the producer's choice, your choice in sourcing inputs, recognizing the limitations of our continent, while at the same time avoiding deflation and circumvention, because the last thing we would want is to create one African market that is not conducive, or that could only be used as a platform by external private sector actors. We do not need the flexibilities in the rules to be used to circumvent trading within Africa. We want to promote regional value chains. We want to support the industrialization within the continent. So this is, I guess, an overview of the AfCFTA, the protocol, its mechanisms of creating one African market. And I hope that this gives you an idea of how you could potentially leverage the AfCFTA as important stakeholders of the agreement. With that, I end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lula Day, for that insightful presentation. You covered a number of issues, which I think I'm very sure most of us now we are at least we are now clear with what the protocol in trade in goods is all about. Participants, I will now invite questions for anybody who has got any comment, maybe any question. I think this is an opportunity for you to be able now to raise or comment or any recommendation maybe you wish to have. Please, this is your opportunity. So maybe I can hear from the floor. Anybody who has got a question or maybe comment. You can unmute, then you should be able now to make raise your question.
I have a question.
Yes.
I would like to find out, is there a proportion that is acceptable as regards foreign inputs added to the products where the rules of origin, yes, as regards the rules of origin, is there a proportion that is acceptable as regards foreign inputs added to the products? I saw, I had a part where this was raised, that some level of foreign inputs are allowed due to the fact that they may not be available where the products are being manufactured. So is there a proportion that is acceptable as regards that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I can see there's also another question from the chat, which maybe to Lula Day. That is, in Africa, we have various RECs already in operation. That is EAC, SADC, COMESA, ECOWAS. These have made gains and faced challenges. So what has been done to ensure that CFTA builds gains and proactively addresses the challenges? That's one of the questions from the chat. Maybe you can get one more, then I think she can take 3 of them together.
Yeah, hello?
Yes,
Hello?
yes, please.
Yeah, Mohammed Ali from Sudan. Yes, I have one question, sir.
Go ahead.
I just want to know how AfCFTA is going to measure between the requirements and other regions block like COMESA, SADC, ECOWAS. We want to know the concepts, how you are going to measure all these blocks, ECOWAS, SADC, ECA, all these kinds, how you are going to measure it in the AfCFTA one platform in the future. Sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you'll get the answer. Yeah, thank you very much. Anybody, the last one, then we can now allow Lullaby to.
Yeah,
Yes,
my name
please.
is Eugene. A quick one. What's the likelihood the regional countries likely? Can you hear me?
Say your name and maybe you are at the institution so that people can be able to relate to your name, institution.
My name is Eugene Izaiman. I'm the CEO for the African Business Chamber based in London.
Go ahead.
My quick question is, what's the likelihood the regional countries likely to adopt common standard tariffs and taxation?
Okay, good. Thank you very much for the question. I think with that, maybe we can allow Ludade to respond. Yeah, Ludade, now the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I think with regards to the first question, which is the percentage of foreign imports, that depends on the product. Member states have been negotiating the rules of origin to determine for which tariff lines what rules would apply. So, for instance, if there is a fruit juice and that juice requires fruits that are not available within the continent, or the volume available within the continent is not enough for the private sector to meet the demands of the market, then sourcing will be allowed. As discussed earlier, whatever is sourced cannot be wholly sold or given a preferential treatment. It would need to also meet the substantial change requirement. Substantial changes need to be made to the product in order for it to qualify. So I don't think there are any hard and fast rules with regards to the percentage required or allowed for foreign sourcing. It's a product by product or tariff line by tariff line conversation. So that's with regards to the first question. With regards to building gains from RECs and how the AfCFTA deals with this, the AfCFTA recognizes regional trade agreements. A building blocks approach is taken in the AfCFTA. What this means is that the AfCFTA, in a sense, tries to leverage whatever gains have been achieved through RECs, and then will also accept all rules so long as they don't directly contradict with the AfCFTA, and where there is a contradiction between the rules or conflicts between the rules, the AfCFTA clearly prevails. As an example, we can take the rules of origin. As stated earlier, the AfCFTA allows for REC FTAs to use their own rules of origin when trading between FTA member states. That, I think, also addresses the third question with regards to how the AfCFTA tries to balance REC arrangements and their internal rules with creation of Continental Free Trade Area. Standards and tariffs. So one of the annexes, obviously, tariff lines, submissions of concessions will, to a certain extent, address the tariff issue. Customs procedures are also supposed to be, or are intended to be, harmonized. So there are a lot of non-tariff barriers that are present through rules. The AfCFTA is trying to address through harmonizing of these rules and procedures, one being the customs and standards. I don't know if this addresses the questions, but I will be happy to clarify further if need be. Dixon, I see another hand.
Can I, let me see. Yes, I'm trying to see if there's any.
Yes, you have Benyam, Ezra, and Mohammed.
Yes, yeah.
Please make your questions.
Good afternoon.
Please make the questions very short, very short, not discussions.
Thank you for the presentation. I am from the Ethiopian Chamber of Commerce. I think we need a better, more clarification on our rules of origin applicability in countries like Ethiopia. At the chamber, we provide certificates of origin, and also COMESA certificate. So REX, what would happen to the REX and the COMESA certificate, and to those services like COMESA certificate and certificates of origin?
Yeah, now we can also move to Mohammed. Mohammed, the floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you for the great presentation. I would like to ask about how can we encourage innovation for African products, and also how to encourage African people to buy African products and goods. It is not enough for us to liberalize the borders. We need to add value, to increase the value added, and so our people can benefit from or leverage from this opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, Mohammed, you're coming from which organization? You have not introduced the organization, your organization? Mohammed?
Yes, sir.
Your organization?
Organization is the Chamber of Information Technology in Egypt.
Okay, thank you. I think those are those two, maybe you can take those two. Although I can see more hands. Let me see. Maybe we can take more. I can see Haimonet. Yes.
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you for the chance, and also thank you for the Luladai for the nice presentation. And my first question is, like in your presentation, you identifying there is 90%, 70%, and 3%. Is that in the 70%? You said that you mentioned that there are products which are sensitive. Is that identified? It's already identified that product?
Okay. I think we got, are you through? Now we got the next one. Josephine Mbadi, the floor is yours. Please just mention your name and introduce your organization, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Josephine Mbadi. I'm from AfriSTEM Connection in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you very much, Lulade, for the presentation. This is just a follow-up question on one of the ones that you answered in the first instance. You talked about harmonization and concessions, but we have a challenge with the sovereignty of states within the REX, especially within EAC. Hence, taxation and tariffs have become very hard to implement. With this new agreement for business, what does this translate to in terms of timelines and actual implementation? Thank you.
Josephine, I didn't quite get that question. Could you please repeat?
Oh, all right. Yeah, you talked about harmonization and you talked about concessions. And you've also mentioned about the number of countries that have already signed up that are ready to be part of this agreement. But in some of the regs, the regional economic councils, like for example, the EAC, we have had challenges with the sovereignty of states. So the implementation of taxation and tariff has become really hard. So with this new agreement, the AfCFTA, how will it translate in terms of timelines and actual implementation of things like the tariffs and the actual concessions and harmonizations you're talking about?
Yeah, so Lullaby, I think you can take those questions. I think from there, then we move on to the next session. So the floor is yours, Lullaby.
Okay, thank you again for the very insightful questions. I'll start with the first with regards to what happens to COMESA REC certifications, rules of origin certifications, apologies. So as I've alluded to earlier, the AfCFTA envisages for full accumulation. And what that means is that if you have rules of origin that already apply between state parties, REC FTA state parties, then you are allowed to apply those rules. What that means for your certifications is that they will apply so long as your COMESA member state recognizes it. So I hope that it addresses it in a sufficient manner. The second question about encouraging innovation. This also speaks to the issue of designing rules of origin that take into account Africa's current developmental state and progress. So, of course, we want to encourage innovation. We want to make sure that the AfCFTA primarily benefits African businesses because it is for African goods and African service providers. However, we also need to be aware of the fact that we do not have all the inputs necessary to produce some of the goods we need for industrialization. And so it's a very tricky balance between allowing member states or private sector actors to source from inputs necessary to produce their goods and to export within Africa, and at the same time avoiding trade diversion and the problem you discussed earlier, which is other market players taking advantage of this agreement. So this is what the rules of origin negotiations have been all about balancing those two needs. With regards to translation of the AfCFTA into practice and implementation, so far as member states have submitted their tariff offers, they will be required, and of course, once those offers have been validated by the AfCFTA Secretariat as technically sufficient, they will be required to offer those preferential treatments to other state parties. This, whether or not the timelines are kept and to what degree member states are cajoled into actually implementing, also depends on other state parties demanding that these be implemented. And that also hinges on the private sector and associations lobbying for the implementation. And when state parties fail to adhere, going through the option of the different conflict resolution mechanisms, because One of the reasons that agreements in the continent, free trade area agreements, have not always translated to business benefits for the private sector is because member states shy away from resolving disputes in a very formal manner. So this is also something the AfCFTA hopes to address through including the protocol on trade dispute resolution. The last question raised is on the 7% identified as sensitive. So of course, member states out of the 100% of their tariff lines are allowed to keep 7% as sensitive. What this means is that they will be required to liberalize trade on the 7%, but the timeline is pushed back a bit. This 7% depends on the specific economy. What's sensitive as a product for Ethiopia, for example, might not be so for Kenya or South Africa. We will know what these products are once the schedules of tariff concessions are available. So there are no hard and fast rules around which products need to be classified as sensitive or which products can be excluded. So I hope this answers your questions. Yeah. Dixon?
Yeah, yes, sorry. Now, I've seen, I think there's an additional question, but I think we encourage participants to you post your questions, comments, and maybe recommendation in the chat because of time. So we need to move on to the next session. This is the session where now we're looking at the application part of it. I think we'll be taken through on the issue of the development and promotion of the regional and continental value chain, and also developing the productive capacity. That's mostly the application. So with that, I think we will invite Judith Ameso to be able to take us through. Judith Ameso, she's also a trade expert from African Trade Policy Center, that is UNECA. Also, she assists in coordinating the development of the CFTA national and regional strategy across AU member states. So with that, I think I just want to invite Ameso to take us through the presentation. Ameso, you're able to share your presentation?
Hi, Dixon. Good afternoon, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, I'm not able to share my presentation. I've had some challenges with that. Is it possible for you to share from your end?
Okay. We try to, let us try to upload.
Okay. I've also sent it to you in the chat box, so perhaps it might be easier to, oh, there you go. Okay, so thank you, Dixon, and good afternoon once again, ladies and gentlemen. Now that we've heard what the AfCFTA is about and how it translates for business, we can then look at the implementation aspects, and I'll start more broadly with the AfCFTA implementation strategies, and then zero in on regional value chains and enhancing productive capacities in manufacturing. And I have to say my job probably is a little bit easier this afternoon, as some of the issues, especially on regional value chains and productive capacities, have been highlighted in the opening session by Sandra, as well as the chairman. So we'll be looking at could you go to the next slide, please? Dixon, next slide, please. Okay, while we wait for him. So starting with the AfCFTA strategies, What these are is just national and regional strategies for implementation of the AfCFTA, and it's a tool for both individual countries as well as regions to implement the AfCFTA agreement. At ECA, so far, we are currently supporting about 41 countries, which also includes some regional economic communities to develop AfCFTA implementation strategies, and they are at different stages of this process. So if you look at that table there, you will see the countries or the regions or the regional economic communities and where each of them is. So most of the countries are at the inception phase, which means they're still trying to figure out the scope of the strategy, before we go into the next phase, which is the consultative phase. However, we have 11 countries in Africa that have validated their AfCFTA strategies, and these are now also being supported in different aspects related to implementation. In Sierra Leone, for example, we are currently supporting them to develop an industrial policy and a special economic zones policy. In Togo, we have had a capacity building for the customs officials in preparation for them to be able to implement the customs operations under the AfCFTA. And in Cameroon, we've also had capacity building for the AfCFTA Implementation Committee, which will be charged with the responsibility of monitoring and following up on a national level implementation of the agreement. Now, again, if you look at that table, you will see in blue, I've just highlighted there for you the COMESA member states, and it should give you an idea of where your respective countries are in terms of developing their AfCFTA strategies. So from the Southern African region, or from the COMESA member states, we have Zambia and Zimbabwe so far that have validated their AfCFTA strategies. So next slide, please. The objective of these strategies is the idea really is that they should be complementary and sit in place with other development frameworks, so that this is the national development plan or national visions, documents and the like. So they're expected to complement the broader development framework, especially in relation to trade and industrial policy of each state party. And this is both at national and regional level. The approach we take in terms of developing the strategy is both participatory and inclusive. That means involving stakeholders from all across its government, the private sector, civil society, academia, and paying particular attention to gender and youth groups, because these tend to be a demographic that is often disproportionately affected in trade. However, for purposes of ownership of the strategy and actual implementation of the AfCFTA, the process of developing these strategies is led by a national focal point. Typically, at national level or at country level, that is the Ministry of Trade, and at regional level, it will be the Secretariat of the respective regional economic community. Now, looking at these strategies, it is an opportunity for the private sector to influence the strategies and contribute to solutions or interventions on different challenges that they might be facing, including regional value chains and productive capacities, because through the consultative phase, you're able to share what the challenges are specifically regarding the AfCFTA, and then how to design policies or interventions that will respond specifically to those challenges. So if you go to the next slide, please. This highlights some of the key components of the AfCFTA strategies, and these are common themes that we have seen emerging out of some of the strategies that have already been developed. So some of these include the macroeconomic framework, production and trade, which really is a diagnostic or analytical part of the strategies, looking at the macroeconomic context, an overview of some of the enabling conditions for structural transformation, as well as identifying some key macroeconomic challenges and risks, and also now in the context of COVID, looking at the specific impacts of COVID and their implications for building back better and stronger. Then we have the situation analysis, which analyzes the existing conditions within the country, the relevant policy, regulatory, and institutional frameworks, both at national and regional level, looking specifically at the alignment with the AfCFTA, because as you know, for the AfCFTA to be domesticated, there needs to be some kind of alignment or revision of some national laws to take into account the AfCFTA. The situation analysis also looks at identifying capacity needs, just to make sure that there is sufficient capacity to be able to ensure effective implementation of the AfCFTA, and also a review of some of all of them, the operational instruments under the agreement. This is the non-tariff barrier, the online non-tariff barrier, monitoring, reporting mechanism for elimination of NTBs, as well as other operational instruments. Then it goes into the AfCFTA related risks and mitigation measures, which identifies some potential impacts, risks, and costs of adjustment relating from the AfCFTA. I think in the course of interactions with different stakeholders, whether at national or regional level, we have, the question has always been asked in terms of what is the impact of the AfCFTA, and is this not going to reduce the revenue for governments from tariffs and things like that? So this section of the document looks at this specifically. And now it is also with the Afrexim Bank looking at how to mitigate some of these costs of adjustment. It is an important part of the document of these AfCFTA strategies to understand what are the likely risks, and is it possible to cost them, and how can the adjustment facility be used to respond to some of these risks. Then it goes into an important part of the strategy, which is identifying and prioritizing production and trade opportunities. And this is where we see some work coming in on regional value chain. So looking at where are the market opportunities, what are the priority sectors and products for value addition and regional value chain development. This is, of course, taking into account various indicators such as reveal comparative advantage, market size, economic risks, and so on and so forth. Then the strategy also looks at overcoming the constraints that need to be overcome, and then goes into a key or an important part of the document, what I like to refer to as a strategic part of the document, which is the action plan, the monitoring and evaluation framework. And this really, for me, is the core of the strategy, because it tells you what the strategic objectives are to increase trade performance, in particular intra-African trade of goods and services within the context of the AfCFTA, and also developing specific interventions that will respond to the challenges that have been identified, and also looking at some of the institutional arrangements, such as establishing a national AfCFTA committee in the case of countries, or a regional AfCFTA committee in the case of regional economic communities. Then it goes into financing of AfCFTA implementation, which attempts to identify and review potential sources of funding to support effective implementation. And this is important because, you know, once you have the strategy, then the other part is for it to be implemented. You have to throw resources behind it. And that's what this section of the strategy tries to do. And finally, you have a communications and visibility plan, which tries to design some responses of improving awareness around the AfCFTA across the board, whether it's within government or the general public, or within the private sector, different stakeholder groups, and also planning for strategic engagement of key groups and stakeholders, including in some cases identifying AfCFTA ambassadors who can champion implementation of the AfCFTA, whether at national or at regional level. The agreement also, the strategies also look into cross-cutting issues such as gender, youth, environment, urbanization, technologies, and what are some of the strategies or interventions that can be designed around that to make sure that for example, youth and women's groups are actually able to benefit from the AfCFTA. Next slide, please. Yeah. So now that we have seen sort of like the arrangements for some of the implementation of the AfCFTA, what are some of the opportunities for development or promotion of regional value chains? So if you look at regional value chains in Africa, they do offer an opportunity for countries to climb up the value chain by either using the region to boost their competitiveness or producing and exporting higher value products. And you'll also see that well-established regional value chains can provide the opportunity for countries in the region to link gainfully into global and continental value chains, and also increasing their bargaining power with lead firms. Now, one of the concerns, right at the start was, there's a significant diversity in the economic configuration of African countries. So how then will the AfCFTA be able to handle this? And for this very reason, the AfCFTA will have some diverging impacts on economies. But when you take a closer look at it, the most competitive and industrialized African economies, they're better placed to take advantage of opportunities offered by larger markets, of course, because they already have some capacity to be able to produce and supply these markets. However, other economies are also able to benefit from the agreement by fostering their linkages into regional value chains and strengthening entry into value chains. So looking at where can we source, where, for example, can the more industrialized African economies source inputs that will feed the industrialization in those countries, while the less industrialized also develop their capacity and build around structural transformation as well as industrialization. Next slide, please. I think Sandra mentioned in her opening remarks that we saw some trade and some disruptions in trade and supply that was brought along by the COVID pandemic, but it also brought some positives in as far as regional value chains are concerned. Because of these disruptions in the global trade and supply or distribution chains, we're now seeing a shift from the global level to regional or local levels. And here you can see two examples of companies that have responded by providing essential COVID supplies in South Africa. A company, UMask, redirected its production from protective masks that they were initially providing for producing rather for mining and agricultural companies to now medical respirator masks in response to the demand that was created as a result of the pandemic. And in Nigeria as well, the National Agency for Science and Engineering Infrastructure produced the first made in Nigeria ventilators, which, as we all know, was an essential pharmaceutical product in the context of COVID. So in this slide now, we're going to discuss how to promote value chains. And there are a couple of ideas there, but first by focusing on filling the gap in production and trade, specifically for strategic sectors that contribute to to Africa's or even at regional level that contribute to their export earnings, as well as those with significant unexploited production and trade potential. And some of these include agriculture, agro-processing, oil and gas, as well as minerals. Then another way is to promote regional cooperation and public-private partnerships for investment in the development of value chains of these strategic sectors. How can the private sector get involved at regional level to contribute to the development of these value chains? And then how do we link this up with the role of government and the secretariats for the different regional economic communities? Can we design some cooperation around that? But also it's important to move beyond integration at the national and sub-regional levels to encompass both the continental and regional markets. For example, in the context of the tripartite free trade area, as well as the AfCFTA, both of which aim to liberalize trade beyond the traditional trading partners within the regions or the regional economic communities to cover a larger ground. I think earlier in the opening remarks, Ambassador Kipyego, I hope I pronounced that correctly, did mention that the TFTA sort of was a building block or gave some kind of impetus for the establishment of the AfCFTA. So then, how do we move to cover larger ground than our traditional trading partners? So other ways for promoting value chains are, next slide please, in creating an enabling environment for profitable and secure private investments in the coordinated regional sector input and regional value chains, designing and implementing policies, legal and institutional frameworks to promote private investment in regional value chains. So for example, looking at things like investment codes, land policies, fiscal policies, and how they fit within the framework to promote private investment rather than curtail it in these regional value chains. And then also creating or strengthening regional research and centers of excellence to harness the best technology and sustain innovation in strategic value chains. I think one of the, I don't know whether I read it from the chat box or it was from one of the comments from the floor, it is important to have the technologies to be able to add value to whatever products or to be innovative and sustain these innovations. So what role how can we use research centers and centers of excellence to be able to develop and sustain interventions for the purpose of developing and promoting regional value chains. Now, on to productive capacities. When we talk about productive capacities, it's important to cover this in the sense of both farm level productive capacities and country level productive capacities, because these may be targeted either differently or together when we're trying to address the challenges of or to enhance productive capacities, because you have to know where the challenge is in order to design an effective response around it. So at the farm level, you'll see individual capacities, which has to do with the skills, experiences, and productive knowledge of the workers. Organizational capacities, which has to do with the knowledge of the organization, what it requires to operate the technical and organizational functions. Then scale efficiency, operation, technological capacities. Again, this has to do with the ability to generate, absorb, and manage technological and organizational change. And finally, innovation capacities, what capacities are needed to innovate across different organizational and technological functions. And often these farm level capacities often will contribute to to the higher level, which is country level productive capacities. Country level productive capacities, and there we look specifically at infrastructure capabilities and institutional framework or the political economy context. Now, still on the issue of enhancing productive capacities, if you're looking at the manufacturing sector, next slide, please. Yes. If you're looking at the manufacturing sector specifically, Africa accounts for a relatively high share of the global population, but if you look at its share of the global manufacturing value added, it is low. So between 2010 and 2018, it ranged between Africa's share of global manufacturing value added ranged between 9 and 11%. And if you compare the average for other regions, say Southeast Asia, and which was 23%, which was 15.2%, and then East Asia and the Pacific, which was 23%. Looking at these productive capacities in the manufacturing sector, it is evident that manufacturing plays a limited role in African economies. And this is largely due to the low level of productive capacities. And we see this in terms of the commodity heavy export portfolio of the African continent, where a lot of the products are exported out of the continent or out of the regions without any or with very little value added to them. Next slide, please. So this table is a summary of some of the top challenges identified in selected African countries in terms of productive capacity in the manufacturing sector. So in the blue, you will see selected COMESA member states, and in green, you will see comparators from other African countries, some of which are close to the COMESA region, and some which are considered the giants or the larger economies, if you will, in the continent. But what comes out clearly out of this is that the challenges that these countries face are more or less similar. We do see common themes emerging on the high cost or shortage in supply of electricity, manufacturing, machinery and spare parts, raw materials and labor, and so on and so forth. If you actually take a closer look at the table, I believe they'll make the slides available to you later. It's more or less the same, the same challenges that have been identified in these different countries. Next slide, please. So this here is just a snapshot of the access to electricity in Africa as of 2019. And this is just to show as far as one of the challenges goes in terms of shortage or no access to electricity. This will just give you an indication, and we can see that in most African countries, less than half the population have access to electricity, which undoubtedly presents a challenge for manufacturing, because then you can't access electricity. It means that your production costs will go high, as you have to rely on other and often more expensive ways to be able to manufacture. Next slide, please. In response to some of the challenges that have been identified, the question now comes, how do we enhance productive capacities in manufacturing? And I'll focus on two of the challenges. This is on the availability or cost of inputs, and then we'll see the next slide. We'll look at the next slide thereafter. Yes, that on infrastructural related challenges. Could you please go back to the previous one? Okay, thank you. So it goes without saying that manufacturing firms, they require stable and reliable access to inputs at affordable prices to be able to fully utilize or enhance their capacities. And so what African governments need to do is to enhance access to key production inputs at affordable prices and create incentives for these farms to enhance their capacities. Some of the specific actions they could take to achieve this goal could be giving priority to manufacturing farms in terms of allocation of foreign exchange so that they can import the key equipment or spare parts that is necessary for production, and also providing incentives to manufacturing firms to increase the percentage of inputs that they can source locally, providing labor market information, again, to ensure that skilled workers are aware of the available
That's
when. Okay, sorry, there was a disruption there. Yeah, so making it easy for employers to hire skilled workers from other African countries, and this is where we see the importance of the protocol on free movement of people coming in to be able to facilitate movement of workers across the African borders in order to provide services in other countries. And then another strategy is reducing the cost of key inputs used by manufacturing. For example, in within the acceptable confines of the agreement, targeted subsidies. And if you look at agro-processing specifically, there's a need for manufacturing farms to better integrate seasonality of supply into their planning processes, as well as invest in storage facilities to reduce the uncertainty associated with supply of agricultural raw materials. I just wanted to touch a little bit more on ensuring appropriate cost of key inputs. I think I had a question earlier in terms of how I don't know if I got it correct, but how the tariffs and I think the taxation regime would be implemented under the AfCFTA. And I think there are incentives for this. For example, if you look at things, because what the AfCFTA will do is as tariffs reduce as an importer or as a consumer, what that means is that you can have access to a wider variety of products available in your local respective market. And because again of the tariff reduction, it means that you will be able to access these products at a lower cost. And the same goes for key inputs that will be required for purposes of supporting manufacturing or enhancing manufacturing capacities. Next slide, please. Okay, now if you look at the infrastructural challenges, most of the manufacturing operations do require electrical machinery at some point in their processes. So the lack of basic utility services is a common factor that, as you saw from the cross-section of countries, it is a common factor that is has been cited as affecting productive capacity in African manufacturing, either because it's costly or unreliable, or it's outdated technology, or it's less efficient. It's a broad very many factors that are included in this. So yeah. Again, related to that also, issues to do with incessant power outages, as well as low supply of electricity is another major issue. I think in this case here, we all know, or we've heard about the experience of in Nigeria, whether it's just the manufacturing sector or even the normal everyday man. They rely a lot on generators for their lighting and power power supply or needs. Now, finding a long-lasting solution to these energy-related challenges, what it requires is diversifying the energy generation mix, and more importantly, adopting a holistic approach to the design and implementation of the energy policy. So what that would involve, for example, is addressing segments in all, challenges in all the segments of the power sector value chain, that is, whether it is generation, transmission, and distribution. Those need to be plugged in order to make sure that there is access to electricity. And it also requires involving more stakeholders in policy formulation and implementation to enhance transparency and ownership of the process. But beyond that, the things like exploring alternative sources of electricity, and these need not be expensive. For example, the use of generators is something that is expensive, but alternative sources like solar, in the long run, those are cheaper alternatives to electricity that can support the manufacturing sector. We can also look at in countries where there's an excess or steady supply of electricity, is there a possibility of exporting this electricity to countries that need it? And this can address the challenges again in the value chain. If you're unable to generate or transmit, then importing of this energy is another strategy that can be identified. And finally, looking at other issues away from electricity, looking more at the issues of transport, the hard infrastructure in terms of the roads and the rail and so on and so forth. How do we tap into the regional potential or cooperation for infrastructure? For example, there's a Northern Corridor, there's the African Union's initiative on PIDA, and so many other initiatives.
You can start concluding, yeah?
Yes, this is the last slide. This is the last slide. Yeah. Yeah, so tapping into those cooperation or existing arrangements for improving the infrastructure across the continent. So last slide, please. Okay, so just in summary or to conclude, what we're saying is that implementation of the AfCFTA through national and regional strategies, it presents various entry points for regional value chains and interventions to address specific issues related to productive capacities, not only in manufacturing, but also in other sectors. The question for the private sector is, how engaged are you with your national and or regional AfCFTA processes? And secondly, what does your national strategy propose in terms of regional value chains and productive capacities? I think those would be key questions for you to look at and respond to be able to know what is happening at country level and also at regional level in terms of these important issues of value chains as well as productive capacities. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Judy. I think for that presentation, you have given us the highlight of the African productive capacity. At least now we know how we can be able to build our capacity, of course, through value addition and also making sure we are able to develop our industry. I think the time has gone. I don't know if I should allow maybe one question, or maybe we move to the next presentation. Maybe I'll just invite one question, then I invite one question, then you move the next presentation. Anybody? The floor is open. Just one question. You introduce yourself, then you indicate your institution, then you can raise your point. I'm not seeing any hand. So Since I'm not seeing any hand, can we move to the, I think we need to move to the next presentation because of time. So I think the next presentation now is looking at different issues. Now we're looking at the market access in terms of regulatory requirements. We have heard about the African capacity, productive capacity. Now we need to know, after you have produced, what next? How do you access the market? I think with that, we will specifically look at the area of TBT, giving us, of course, we'll be told about the requirements and how do we achieve the requirements under the TBT.
Sorry,
that,
Dixon.
Yes.
Dixon,
Yes.
There's just one question from Benyam Ezra. Maybe you can take a question from him and then we move to the next presenter. Yes, thank you.
Okay, we can let's take one question, then from there we can be able to move to the next presentation.
So just a short, simple question. Thank you very much for excellent presentation. So in designing the strategy and implementation, what do you think as private sector representative, the Chamber of Commerce? I'm from Ethiopia Chamber of Commerce, which is an umbrella private sector representative in Ethiopia. So what do you think the major role of the Chamber in designing and implementing?
Okay, Judy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Benyam. And I was just looking at the comments in the chat box as well, which has an almost similar questions about the agreement is made by the government, but it's trading that is implemented by the private sector. What is the relationship between the government and the private sector in implementing the agreement? And does the private sector participate in the processes? Well, if I may start to that, and then I come to Benyam's question. What countries typically do leading up to the negotiations is to have in-country consultation so that they have a common position that is informed by different stakeholders at national level. So that is one of the ways that the private sector can sort of like engage in or make contributions into the negotiations process. And they can also be a part of the delegation that goes into these negotiations and be able to advise while the negotiations are actually going on. But you're right in saying that the trading of the agreement primarily will be affected, affects the private sector, because they are the actual operators, on the ground who are experiencing these things. And this is once again where we see the importance of the strategies coming in, and taking that together with answering Benyam's question is the role of the private sector, whether it is the umbrella, first for the umbrella associations is to organize your membership to be able to participate in these consultative processes, and also be able to follow up with your various national focal points on the AfCFTA, whether it is to find out what the country position is, to contribute to that country position, to engage in the process of developing the strategy, to design interventions that respond to your specific needs, to review and make sure that the interventions or the policies that come out of that actually respond to you as the private sector. But beyond that also, I think the private sector, especially umbrella associations, do have the responsibility of sensitizing and raising awareness among their membership in terms of what the AfCFTA is, how they can engage with it, how they can benefit from it, and also importantly, how they can prepare themselves. So, for example, knowing where how or who issues the certificates of origin, as well as different customs procedures, because there are changes that are going to come, and you don't want your members to be stranded because now they're changing from the or there's a sort of a system between the COMESA, trading under COMESA and then trading under the AfCFTA. So I would say that that is the role of the private sector, and that is also the engagement in terms of participation in negotiations process. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. I think that's the last question. So I think we move to the next presentation, and the next presentation is on the market access regulatory requirement, which will be basically on the issue of standard. To take us through that presentation would be Ruben Gesore. Ruben Gesore is from ARSO. Is a technical director in ARSO, of course, responsible for coordinating technical program on the issue of standard harmonization and conformity assessment system. So at this point, I would like to invite Gesore to be able now to take us through his presentation. Gesore.
Thank you, Dixon, and it's my pleasure to present on this part of the trade facilitation aspect, which is usually the least discussed about whenever it comes to issues of agreements on trade or regional economic agreements. But nevertheless, one of those small cogs in a big wheel that without it, you find a lot of issues arising. So I'll try and make it quite fast by introducing what the organization is, so that it tries to connect with what COMESA is doing. So ARSO, or the African Organization for Standardization, was established a while back. The two colleagues who have spoken happen to come from one of the organizations that was apparent to this ARSO, that's the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and the Organization of African Unity, which is now the African Union. From that point on, the issue was to harmonize national sub-regional standards as African standards, which in effect means if we have a standard in a particular African country, we can take it up and consider it for purposes of harmonizing it to be used across the continent. Now that brings in the point that what we intend to have, instead of the 55 or 54 standards that you might have for one product across the continent, we only need to have one. And if we can get one, that would be the best approach, so that it is the one that is used to reduce the barriers to trade. Once all these other issues of tariffs have been agreed upon, once the rules of origin have been complied with, the other part that you must comply with is the quality aspects of the product, so that it can move across the borders. The other role for ARSO is promoting and coordinating standardization and conformity assessment practices in the continent, operates a regional certification marking scheme with a view to certifying the quality of products of the continent, and encouraging and facilitating the development of African Union member states of technical regulations to be based on African harmonized standards or international standards. So those are the aspects that we do know affect the movement of goods across the continent. And if they can be harmonized, we shall be having a very smooth issue of trade in goods. So how was this organization established? At the point of discussion, it was established at the highest level in terms of the countries being members by the constitution accessed or accession being by the heads of state of the various countries. That, however, as time went on, became that the ministers in charge of trade and industry, or in charge of commerce, or in charge of foreign affairs would be the ones signing up the constitution. At the moment, the member states of Africa are represented by the national standards bodies, and through the national standards bodies, the national stakeholders are coordinated to participate in the harmonization of standards in the continent. And the purpose, essentially, though I've used one of the pictures from the East African community, is that we have the non-tariff barriers, issues of roadblocks, issues of customs and exercises, issues of inspections have been harmonized. Then you find that at the end of the day, probably what is stopping you from trading is the issue of having different standards in the member states. In that case, then we need the harmonization to be done so that it can allow for the free movement of goods across the borders, so that it then actuates one of the requirements of free movement of goods in the continent under the AfCFTA. So how are standards done? We do this through a very well-structured system where we have the ALSO General Assembly. At the moment, because we have 43 member states who have signed up for the membership in ALSO, the General Assembly constitutes all those member states. And then we have the council, the ALSO Council, which constitutes 12 member states. This acts as the board of directors or the executive arm of the organization. Now, under that, you find there's a joint advisory group, and the joint advisory group actually is the regional economic communities, where you find COMESA, East African Community, ECOWAS, AMU, IGAD, SADC, and all these 8 regional economic communities are represented. And the issue was that whatever is required for harmonization or strategic interest of the regional economic communities must be brought to ARSO through the regional economic community representatives, and they advise the ARSO Council as well as the ARSO Standards Management Committee, so that they address the priorities of the regional economic community. Under that, we do have the technical committees. Under the technical committees, we can have technical subcommittees or technical working groups and task forces after that. So very strongly, that also means that the organization is working closely with regional economic communities, of which COMESA is one of them. And if there are interests of COMESA that need to be addressed, then also stands in and waits for that to be brought forward. I will not go into this, but to also just point out that we have a standards harmonization model, which allows members of COMESA and members of trade associations like EABC to actually approach, also to do particular standards that are of interest to their members. So that model is open, and therefore we encourage the members of the COMESA Business Council to bring forward any issues that they need so that we can address them in terms of standards harmonization and conformity assessment. So standards harmonization on their own is not enough, and we recognize the fact that we need to have a conformity assessment, and that is the issues of testing, the issues of certification, inspection, and all that, to allow for these products to be accepted across the borders. And that's why we established from 1990 a conformity assessment program that is able to provide the necessary certification processes to allow for free movement of goods across the borders. Now, currently we do have a number of schemes, 10 schemes that are operational, addressing issues of agriculture, addressing issues of value-added foods, addressing issues of sustainability, and we are moving to addressing issues of manufacturing or manufactured goods. So that system is available. I may not read about it all, but I believe that we shall be having these presentations available to the members so that they can assess and perhaps seek further clarification from ALSO. So for purposes of facilitating continental trade, we have established 2 marks. There's a general product mark, that is the ALSO mark. At the same time, we do have what we call the eco-labeling mark to address issues of sustainability standards or standards that meet environmental requirements as the dictates of the trade move forward in the global scene. So this mark was, for example, the Eco Mark was launched on 8th of March 2019, where at least 7 companies were awarded the marks after being assessed. and their products qualifying for those marks. What are the priorities in terms of the sectors? I'm happy that UNECA has presented a lot on this, and we have done a study together with UNECA, and these are some of the priorities that have been identified when we came together with all the 8 regional economic communities, the 20 top region priorities where we are focusing our standards, conformity assessment procedures, accreditation issues, and also capacity building in terms of training for the various players in the field. We have launched a number of standard committees that are harmonizing standards in these sectors, and as well as also having the certification schemes that you've seen in the previous slides. So moving from there, we look at the regional integration issues, and you will notice, and this is from one of the latest publications from the African Union and the UNECA. Key aspects of regional integration include issues of trade integration. And this is where we play our part, and particularly on the issues of the AfCFTA. So why did we have this particular aspect of the AfCFTA? Of course, it is to create a liberalized single market for goods and services by progressively eliminating barriers to trade. And you can agree with me that the barriers to trade in the continent are actually some of the highest in any continent that you can think of. And these are the kinds of barriers that make the continent trade within itself at a very low rate, depend on external trade, depend on exporting raw materials, because some of our partners across the oceans require raw materials, not anything that resembles a manufactured product. And for that matter, we find that our dependence on those, the exports of raw materials are very high, and we have developed less. And so the African Continental Free Trade Area seeks to lay the foundation for a continental customs union, promote and attain sustainable and inclusive socioeconomic development, and also enhance competitiveness of the economies of the state parties. So all those aspects, I think those who have read the AfCFTA agreement would have read about them. But the key issue that we need to ask ourselves, how do we resolve the issues that face the continent in terms of not trading more with itself? And you find obviously that the member states need to be the drivers. The RECs, or the regional economic communities, which have achieved a very deep kind of integration, are forming the basis for our continental free trade area. And we do need that aspect of ensuring that the regional economic communities, which have established best practices, guide us in terms of moving forward to trading without hindering what happens in the regional economic communities. The questions about, we had the questions about the kind of structures that have been established in the regional economic communities. The issue is that these regional economic communities are not going away anytime soon. Actually, they are the building blocks, and we depend on them to work towards having a fully integrated continent. And for that matter, that we work closely as ARISO with the regional economic communities, and in particular, regional economic communities like COMESA. So under the Annex 6 of the AfCFTA, we look at what are the key issues organizations such as ARISO are supposed to address. So the Annex seeks to facilitate trade through cooperation in the areas of standards, technical regulations, conformity assessment, accreditation, and metrology. So if you look at these are the issues that correspond to the TBT agreement of the WTO. And then what you are supposed to do is to facilitate trade by eliminating unnecessary or unjustifiable technical barriers to trade through reinforcing international best practices in regulation and standard setting, promoting the use of relevant international standards as the basis for technical regulations, identifying and assessing instruments of trade for trade facilitation, such as harmonization of standards, equivalence of technical regulations, metrology, and conformity assessment. So we will look at this, and when you look at the whole annex, the question would be, what are the institutions that would then facilitate this? And you find these institutions are identified very clearly, and the role that they're supposed to play is indicated. So the first is that the state parties shall promote cooperation between their respective standardization bodies with a view to facilitate trade. Now, as of now, I believe that most of the member states in COMESA have established standardization bodies, and for them to actually cooperate, they need to come together in one forum. And the forum that is provided for, as we shall see later on, in the COMESA Treaty is the African Organization for Standardization. So what we need to do as we move forward is to encourage those countries who have not signed up to become members of ARSO, and they're in COMESA to be members of ARSO. We know that there are a few, there are not so many, and they need to be urged to be part of that. That's the only way they can cooperate. Otherwise, if they are on their own, it's not easy for them to do it. And looking at the agreement, if they have signed up to the agreement, it means that the technical institutions really need to follow up with the political agreement that their heads of state have signed up, so that they can be part of the solution rather than being a barrier to the trade that their country may not be participating in due to their non-participation in the harmonization process. And when we look at the second point, it says that the state parties shall develop and promote the adoption or adoption of international standards. That's one of the things that we promote very proactively. Promote the adoption of standards developed by ARSO and AfCFTA. Obviously, you understand that there are two bodies that develop standards in the continent. That's the ARSO for all general standards, and then the African Electrotechnical Standardization Commission, which does electrotechnical standards. Then where relevant international standard required to facilitate trade does not exist, request ARSO and or AfCFTA to develop the required standard to facilitate trade between state parties. So I will not read all those provisions of the annex. They are there. This is just a reproduction of the same. And you can read them and understand that the services of ARSO and AfCFTA are required in terms of harmonizing the standards that you require to do business. Now, it is very difficult for anybody to aspire to add value to any good or service if they're actually not using any standard. It's through the use of standards that we can add value and meet market requirements. Whichever market you meet, it will tell you they have standards, and the standards that they require need to be developed or need to be established by recognized bodies. And some of the recognized bodies, of course, include ARSO and AfCFTA and the national standards bodies. But because we are not dealing with only one country, it also means that you need to have a harmonized standard. Now, some of the barriers that occur due to technical regulations is that you find that some of the member states have established very stringent technical regulations, which are beyond what is used at the international level. And sometimes they have justifications, sometimes they have they don't have very good explanations as to why they have done that. And that's why harmonized technical regulation would play a role. The different technical requirements among member states arise from non-adoption of common international standards that's raising compliance costs and discouraging market access to other African countries. So that is very obvious, and you find that in some cases a member state will tell you our standards are different from yours, or your standards are too low for us. But in essence, you find that if you sat down to discuss, you might find that you can have a common ground to harmonize the standards. With respect to testing and certification, reported concerns are a general absence of information and lack of transparency on the procedural norms and regulations regarding specifications, as well as methods of sampling, inspection, and testing. This is something that is reported quite often, that you can't understand how they tested, they cannot demonstrate how they did it, which method they used, instruments they used, levels of uncertainty, and all that. So a good is rejected and you're told, our country cannot allow your product into it. And that brings barriers to trade. Sometimes the testing method specify exceedingly high levels of sensitivity that may not be justified on grounds of health or safety issues, thereby making the testing cost disproportionately high and even prohibitive. So these are some of the key issues that are being addressed in terms of harmonizing our conformity assessment. And then you find that, of course, there are issues of marking, labeling, and packaging, where you find that some countries are using very outdated technical regulations in issues of marking, labeling, and packaging. And we have a committee that has been launched to actually ensure that we can address these issues. We can have harmonized approaches, and this can facilitate trade among the member states, of which COMESA member states are many. So when we look at how do we tackle these issues of technical regulations? So we can tackle the barriers arising from technical regulations or eliminate them by following approaches which are within the framework of the WTO, TBT, and SPS agreement and the AfCFTA. And these harmonization of standards and technical regulations, mutual recognition, agreements or arrangements, recognition of equivalence of technical regulations, and all the goals are that we want to reduce what industry considers to be technical barriers to trade posed by national regulatory requirements. If we can use these three approaches, we are able to reduce the barriers. So one of the operating principles of the enshrined in most of the treaties is that of mutual recognition. If you read most of the treaties, you find that they enshrine that aspect. But how is it actualized? That is the question that sometimes is not answered and sometimes remains elusive. Member states must accept products from other member states if the products fulfill equivalent safety requirements. If not, the denying member needs to show the burden or bears the burden of proof that yes, we have denied entry of this because it doesn't meet its requirements, and this is what it will happen, it will cost. But most times we find that this is shrouded in politics or the issues of sovereignty and opaque kind of approaches that are not transparent to the others. Member states must accept test results and certificates from competent conformity assessment bodies in other member states. Confidence is assured by accreditation. And unfortunately, you might find that accreditation is not considered very essential by many member states, or they consider that it's very expensive, or they consider that they cannot have a cooperation among member states. And this is what you're encouraging, that if you find that an economy is too small to have an accreditation body, it is possible that you can come up together like what has happened in the SADC region, where they have SADCAS, which acts as a multinational accreditation body. And that is something that most COMESA member states may also look at as an experience, as a learning experience, because that kind of accreditation system has been recognized internationally, and it can facilitate the recognition of conformity assessment for the member states to participate in trade in under the AfCFTA. So issues of equivalence, we have the model has 6 building blocks premised on the parity in public policy objectives. That yes, the wordings and everything else may be different, but the objectives are the same. That you are looking at the safety of human life or the health of human life, issues of environment, and all that. So If you have a different approach, but the objective is the same, that's what you're saying is the parity in public policy objective, then there's a shared regulatory principles, a shared regulatory philosophy, and shared intended outcomes. So this is what would build that aspect of equivalency. You recognize the equivalence of a technical regulation. It doesn't have to be identical, but you can see that what it aims to achieve is the same. And how do you do this? You have the mutual recognition at the upper level, and then you have a cooperation, MOU, a cooperation in data sharing. You are using international standards. There are sector-specific procedural tools, and then there are interim solutions. So as we are doing this, we are moving towards the harmonization of the technical regulations. So for the continent to have this, we need to have specific steps. And I believe that as we have agreed that the regional economic communities are the building blocks, we have to look at what are the issues or what are the steps that we need to take. So the steps that require member states to make clear the product categories to which mutual recognition applies. So we need to select some of the products. We cannot select all the ones that are in our tariff lines. So we can select a few to require the member states to maintain product contact points, providing free information on any national rules that apply to the non-harmonized goods, and to place the burden of proof on the national authorities that intend to deny market access. They must set out in writing the precise technical or scientific reason for their intention to deny the product access to their national market in a written notice which must be produced within a specified timeline to ensure that such notices include the relevant technical or scientific evidence justifying their intention, or to require national authority to begin a dialogue in which the economic operator has the opportunity to defend its case and submit evidence, and to require each member state to set up product points, at least one person, one per country, which provide information on technical rules, advice on prior authorization, give contact details for responsible authorities, and advise the remedies available in case of dispute. So such steps need to be really available. The reason why we need this is that the Agenda 2063 envisions a continental market with free movement.
Sorry, can I interrupt you? Sorry, can I interrupt a little bit? Sorry, yes, participant. We were supposed to have concluded the meeting around 5 o'clock. I think because of the issue of presentation being maybe the question and all that. So let's give ourselves 20 more minutes. So in the next 20 minutes, maybe we should be able to conclude. So bear with us as we at least we allow sorry to make his presentation. So we give ourselves 20 more minutes and then we'll be able to conclude. Thank you. Proceed.
Yeah, I'll try and skip some of this so that the participants can read on their own. So when we look at the pillars of the Agenda 2063, you can see free movement of goods, free movement of persons, mutual recognition arrangements, and the recognition of equivalence of technical requirements, and that MRAs are trade facilitation tools that operate in the regulatory areas. So these are some of the things that you'll see in Agenda 2063 when we interpret it as to how it can be achieved so that the continent moves towards the kind of prosperity that it requires for its citizens. So what we are proposing for ourselves is that we need to have pilot mutual recognition arrangements where we have a limited product coverage, provision of consultation and right to withdraw from the MRA in case of a continuing market access obstacle, because you may have discussions where you've agreed, but then you find that while the one member state has conceded, there are others that continually raise obstacles, and therefore others are not obliged to continue allowing the products without having access in the processing in a reciprocal manner. So then providing a listing of relevant conformity assessment bodies, which at the MRA would cover provision of information exchange and sectoral contact points, establishment of joint committees to ensure effective functioning of the agreement, ensuring preservation of regulatory space within an MRA so that it's not so restrictive that a member state may not be allowed to change if the conditions or circumstances require that they change within their regulatory space certain things. Provisions to address issues of overlap with other existing MRAs, provisions to address agreements that MRA members may have signed with third parties or third countries. We are increasingly seeing that some of these things, especially after the Brexit, you may find that, well, you had an agreement with the European Union, now the UK is coming in, the USA is coming in. So you will need to have ways of addressing some of these arrangements when you find that you are having another arrangement with another member state or a third party. Consideration of opt-in or opt-out flexibility, as well as technical assistance for individual member states, and provisions to address terms and conditions of accession of the MRA. So what ARSO has done, and this is now available to COMESA and other member states, is that we have a conformity assessment structure where we are looking at standards implementation, how standards are implemented. Then we have a subcommittee that deals with the technical regulations. So far, we have now 5 working groups under the subcommittee on technical regulations addressing issues of infrastructure, issues of plant and animal protection. We are also looking at medical devices and pharmaceuticals as the latest edition. So it covers a wide range of areas, and so that platform is available to the regional economic communities like COMESA, and you find that its participation is very effective from the regional economic communities. In the RECs, sometimes the question is whether there is a legal underpinning of if they can adopt African standards. And you find that the regional economic communities have detailed binding legal agreements or provisions which obligate member states to participate and adopt harmonized standards within stipulated timelines. And then an analysis of the treaties and protocols of the regional economic communities indicate that there is an explicit legal pathway which allows for the RECs to adopt African standards much the same way that they actually adopt the international standards from ISO, IEC, or Codex. Now, I'll come to the particularities in terms of COMESA. You look at Chapter 15, which deals with standardization and quality assurance. Article 112 D recognizes that ARSO is the leading cooperating partner in the implementation of appropriate provisions of the COMESA Chapter 15 and obligates COMESA member states to accede to the agreement establishing ARSO. So this is something that I think we need to continually work. Of course, it's not the Business Council, but because the Business Council also has members from all the member states of COMESA, it could be something that we can try and encourage the member states, national standards bodies to become members of ARSO. There are not so many as I indicated, there are few. And then Article 113B authorizes COMESA member states to adopt African regional standards, and where these are unavailable, to adopt suitable international standards for products which are traded in the common market. So that is also another provision which is very key. And on training and standardization and quality assurance, the COMESA Treaty provides Article 119C provides that COMESA shall establish in conjunction with also training programs designed to meet the specific needs of the common market, and indeed cooperate with ARSO and through it with other international agencies concerned with standardization and quality assurance in the implementation of the training programs established for the COMESA Treaty. This further is strengthened by an MOU that we have between COMESA and ARSO, outlining what we need to do. So what this provision says, in essence, is that ARSO is at at the service of COMESA whenever this is required. And I think we've worked with the COMESA Business Council, which is a body under COMESA, very well in terms of training, and we continue to do so. When we look at the continental state of affairs, is that we do not have very many standards so far. When we look at what we have harmonized up to now is 1,469. And out of this, we find that we have 620 product standards. Now, taking the baseline of the AfCFTA agreements, 4,547, the H6 tariff lines, it represents 13.6 of the products, which means that we really need to be moving very fast in terms of harmonizing more standards that will address most of the members of the business community in terms of the products that they put to the market. We are also happy that at ARSO, we now have agreement with bodies like ISO and the European Union so that we can use some of their standards directly after analysis. In the end, I wish to put forward one of the philosophies that we currently have is that we need a sound quality infrastructure for COMESA, for Africa, and for our member states in order for them to actually participate in trade effectively. Let it not be that the issues of standardization sound very technical. They are not as such. We are trying as much as possible to ensure that they are simplified. Let it not be that, you know, when you are investing in a laboratory, you're investing in a standards body, it is seen like it's a lot of money for nothing. And that's why we say that a quality infrastructure is not everything, but without quality infrastructure, everything is nothing. In terms of saying that if our products don't meet the market standards, we will not actually participate in trade. And if we cannot have a good quality infrastructure, which helps us to harmonize the quality parameters, the safety parameters, the SPS parameters of our products, then we may have a very good AfCFTA with very good promises, but we cannot benefit from it. So it will be for nothing. Thank you very much. I wish to stop at that point. You can always contact us through these contacts, and we are free, we are always welcoming any proposal for standardization to be forwarded through the necessary forms that member states can fill or business communities can fill and request that they be addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gesore. I think it's good. Thank you for shedding light on specifically the relationship between COMESA and ARSO. And also, I think the challenge you gave us in terms of, you indicated 1,469 standards have been developed, but against 4,547, which are yet. I think this is one of the source of ATBs or the friction in terms of trade. So with that, I think I open the floor. I think I will invite 2 questions, maybe comments and all that, then you can now close from there. So I can see 2 hands. Let me see who. Yeah, I can see that is Binyam Ezra. Binyam Ezra, the floor is yours. Or Tarek. Then Tarek can come in, Tarek.
Yes, good evening. I'm Tarek Mata, representing the Federation of Egyptian Industries.
Yeah.
Thanks all, thanks the CPC, and thanks to Mr. Robin Kiso for the informative presentation. Actually, I would like to take the chance that he is one of the best experts in this issue, because he was tackling a very important point regarding TPP.
You're not very audible. Okay.
Is it clear now?
Yeah, now it's clear.
Yes. So I would like to take the chance and to thank Mr. Robin Gisor as one of the best experts in this issue. And I would like to raise the point that regarding the ARSO documents we have received later, we have received documents about Made in Africa certification. And actually, it's a very useful strategy, and we fully support the idea of Made in Africa, because we believe this is a very important tool to ease businesses and ease moving our products among our member countries, among the continent. But now I have just a question, because when I studied this document, I have seen that some issues regarding rules of origin were raised in these documents. And by studying it, I don't like to say it's contradicting, but somehow it's not matching all the rules of origin criteria mentioned in the CFTA. And this was unclear for us as the Federation. We want to have a clarification for it. And the second question, I know it's not, it's not obligatory, but we will do all our best to push our business community to benefit from this issue. But on the other hand, is there another study saying, for example, the cost or the cost of the required criteria for having this certification compared to the current standardization certification or accreditation? As a matter of, as a comparison of cost. Thanks a lot, and appreciate your answer.
Thank you. I think the next person, maybe we go to James Ojiambo. You would raise your hand. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dixon, and thanks, Gisore, for the good presentation. I have to comment. The first one, I think the presentation was very good, very informative. We are members of the COMESA Business Council and also CAM at national level, and we are happy to note that we can, through the associations, we can propose standards of interest. So I think that action will take note, and we will be proposing standards. The next point I wanted to just ask is of the published standards, the ones that are already in place, how are they already implemented? Are there instruments, or how are these implemented at national level? Because yes, you can come up with standards at harmonized standards at ASO level, but maybe they're not implemented. So it's because of the importance of these harmonized standards in business facilitation. So it's of interest to us to know if these standards actually have been taken up by national authorities or they are implemented, because they are two different things. You can come up with harmonized standards, but then they're not implemented. So if you can answer on the implementation part, we will appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, let's have the last one by Harriet. Harriet, the floor is yours, the last one.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. We appreciate the presentations. I think by now we have enough light to operate as it were. Thank you. Thank you so much for everything.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the comments and for the Gisore. Now, are you able to? The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions, and thank you very much, Tariq Matar, for bringing up the point. Actually, I had not prepared a slide on that. It's an important aspect for the COMESA Business Council. What we have what we call the Made in Africa criteria, a document that aims to ensure that when we have the African Continental Free Trade Area, it is goods that are made in Africa, it is services that are made in Africa that actually are traded, rather than the continent acting as a big common market for imports, for other people to just come in and trade on their goods and services. So that document tries to bring in the criteria under which the goods and services qualify as made in Africa so that they can enjoy the preferential trade in the continent. I'm happy that the issue of rules of origin has been raised. And what I think we can do is that the document is out for review and commenting. And this is one of the very good inputs that the delegate from Egypt can bring in by identifying. What he has said is that they have identified that there's a disparity between what is in the Made in Africa document and the actual AfCFTA rules of origin. We are waiting for these kinds of comments so that we can make the document better and more accurate in terms of what we actually do need. So I'll very much appreciate that we can get the comments. The member states are free to do that. And as we know, it is not the governments that do business. It is the business associations that actually bring together those people who participate in trade. The government's about collecting revenue. The government's about creating the conducive environments and ensuring that the markets play their role effectively, but they don't do the business. So it is up to the business associations or business councils, the chambers of commerce to actually look at this kind of document and ensure that it serves that very purpose that it is intended to do. So we really expect that it will do the necessary facilitation because it brings in those issues of standardization, quality assurance, or the conformity assessment and accreditation, as well as issues of the intellectual property rights and the rules of origin together in one document so that we can address the holistic product without leaving out some aspects that would make it not to be traded in the market. So we expect a lot of inputs from the business communities. The other part in terms of the cost of implementation, it has not yet been established. It's something that is in the process. So as we move forward, we'll notice that that process of having the Made in Africa is supposed to be self-sustaining and cost-effective for the business community. So it's not like a business venture, but rather as a service renderer so that it's affordable to the businesses. It's not supposed to create any burdens. So any cost that will be attached to it will be something that the business community is comfortable with and has agreed that it's worth paying for. Now, when it comes to James Ojambo's question, you can actually request for a standard. We have forms that you can fill, and then we can process them through the committee, the technical committees that we have. So that is open. You may pass through the national standards body, or you can send directly to us, and then we can process it. We have the mechanisms to process that. So feel free to give us the proposals. Now, on the issue of whether the standards are being implemented at national level, these are the discussions that we are now having. And what we do know for sure is that also the national standards bodies act when they are prompted strongly from the business community. So don't feel like, okay, you say the standards are there, but we can't see them. Ask the national standards body, why is this standard not being implemented? Because if you want to send your product to Morocco, the only standard that they can recognize is the African standard, not the East African community standard, because they are not part of that. So if you have a market outside the East African community, because for COMESA, it's not about COMESA standard, it's about the African standard. So that one, definitely there's no doubt about it. So if there's a member of COMESA, what you need to discuss with them is about complying with the African standard, because that's what their treaty provides for. So in that case, what we really need, the push is from yourselves that the national bodies adopt the African standard to give you a wider reach, but at the same time, we are working towards ensuring that there is no conflict between, for example, Kenya adopting an East African standard, which is the same as the African standard. The mechanism is there so that if there's an East African standard on the same product, they really need to adopt the African standard rather than having two standards, because the treaty in the East African community does not allow for that. And it's not profitable to have parallel standards in any given country. We just need one standard, not 8 as per the regional economic communities, not 55 as per the national standards, as per the number of countries we have in the continent, but one standard for one product. Thank you very much.
Maybe not to leave somebody out. I think there is 2 minutes remaining. So Emma, if you're able to quickly just raise your question, then you can maybe be able to respond to it quickly. Just 2 minutes remaining, Emma.
Okay. Thank you. I wanted to ask. You mentioned something about harmonizing transport services, and I made a comment that in order for that to have, that cannot be done while leaving out the customs procedures and processes. And what I'd like to ask is, what is being done about that, bearing in mind that when we look at just East Africa on its own, you know, we have some countries, they use a CODA system. Kenya, I think Kenya is using Pat Gainde and ICMS. You look at some countries like DRC, which I believe is a signatory of AfCFTA. I think it's using Sindonia. There is a CODA somewhere else. How is this one being addressed? Because I believe transport services, part of the biggest issues that hamper the, that even affect costs and all that of transport in Africa is just these different processes that run from country to country that are track transverses through. Thank you.
Although that one is, I think maybe it could be taken up. Maybe we'll take it up with the other authority, because I think it's more related to maybe revenue authority and all that. Although maybe I can leave it to Gesore to see how we can be able to respond to it. But I think related to revenue authority, you can take it up in a different forum. Then you can be able to get your feedback. Gesore.
You're right, Dixon. So
yes.
It's a multi-agency approach. Yes. It's not just ARSO. We have just started looking at some of the standards, but they will not be touching those aspects which go into the revenue systems. Only looking at, for example, the cross-border transport systems, where you are talking of the vehicles and the kind of information that is necessary for them to cross the borders, the kind of documentation, but not looking at the revenue aspects. So for that to happen, we will need to have not just ARSO, but the other agencies to come in. So as you're right, we are in the very early stages of addressing it, and we are willing to really look at what part can we play. If it is issues of the drivers and the information, if it is issues of the vehicles, the identification, the safety, and all that, we are in that. But not the issues of that touch on revenue and customs. That one, we may not play a big part, but we can be part of the solution, not entirely satisfactory or entirely fully to meet that requirement. Thank you.
I think with that, maybe we conclude our discussion. I think for most of you, it has been a very interesting, insightful session here and there. So I think with that, let's conclude, because the time has already gone. We are almost past our time. We're supposed to have finished 5. We've stretched ourselves by 30 minutes. So my apology, and also for bearing with us, all the ladies and gentlemen. I think it was worthy stretching ourselves for 30 minutes. I think with that, maybe I need to urge you to continue raising your issues in the chat, and we shall continue responding your issues. The ones who have already raised your issues in chat, we shall be responding, or posted your issue in chat, shall be responding to them. And we also still inviting you to send some of the questions you have, so that we see how we can be able to get response on that. So let's keep the conversation going. And also, For the presentation, we will be able to send all the presentation to all of you. So in a few days, I think we should be getting presentation so that you can be able to familiarize, maybe something you missed out, you can be able to go through them so that you can be able to understand more and get more insight what exactly what was presented. And also we'll be able to send a report to all of you. We will prepare the report and send to all of you. So you should be getting reports soon. With that, I think I want now to take this opportunity to thank COMESA, the leadership of CBC, UNECA, who have been here, been very good in terms of presentation, also who have also been giving us a lot of information, and all the organizations who have been which have been presented here, and all the participants. I think thank you for being part of this workshop. It was a very good, informative, and insightful workshop. With that, I think we conclude and we say bye-bye. So now we can adjourn this workshop. Next time we'll be able now to, but let's keep the conversation going, although we are joining the workshop at the moment. Thank you very much and God bless you.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you and bye.
Thank you, have a good evening.
Thank you.
Bye. Good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you much. Have a good
You have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Thank you and bye.
Thank you.